I went into Moon Music with a pretty good idea in my mind of who Coldplay were and what I should be expecting from a new album. However, as I pressed play and was introduced to the album through its title track, I found my expectations subverted. The track begins with almost 3 minutes of ambient synths, even before Chris Martin's vocals enter the fray. He croons alongside this gentle piano melody for a few more minutes, and then the song ends with a segue into the second track. The experience reminded me of that of Pink Floyd and their seminal release, Dark Side of the Moon, and in that moment I couldn't help but think, are Coldplay misunderstood? I feel like my relationship with Coldplay has evolved over the course of this year. You see, I'm too young to remember those early albums such as Parachutes and A Rush of Blood to the Head, and as such I associate the band much more with their more pop-oriented sound of the 2010s. You combine that with me being very much a rock fan, and I think it's fair to say that I was quite snooty towards the band for quite a long time. However, I have since gone back to those early releases, and I have found things to appreciate within them, especially that second album, Rush of Blood to the Head. However, still, this is 2024, and I have an idea in my mind of who Coldplay are at this point in their career. Going into Moon Music, I was expecting it to be similar to Music of the Spheres, which to me is very much an album made up of conventional pop songs, albeit with these interlude tracks sprinkled in to help add a little bit more cohesion to the record as a whole. Now, I do know that Music of the Spheres contains Coloratura, if you like the band's 10-minute epic, and while it is a cool song, I very much thought that was just a one-off, not just in its length, but in the way that the song has multiple different contrasting sections, and how it plays out unlike a conventional song. Listening to Moon Music as an album and allowing it to wash over you, I think you can be forgiven for assuming that the 3 singles are the only conventional songs on here. To quickly talk about them, Feels Like I'm Falling in Love I think has a really good chorus, something of an earworm. And We Pray I think has a cool vibe. I do like what's going on with those digitally manipulated strings. And indeed, I think We Pray uses its multiple features surprisingly well. All My Love, as well, is a lovely track. It feels more like an old school Coldplay song, and it feels a little bit more like a live performance, even though I don't doubt that there's a lot of production magic going on within the song. Although I will say about All My Love that I feel like the song isn't quite as memorable as it wants to be. Whereas Feels Like I'm Falling in Love is that earworm that gets stuck in my head for the whole day, I don't quite get that with All My Love. Although I do feel like that was something very much the band were intending. Going back to the album, that moment that I mentioned in the intro, how Moon Music kind of foreshadows and then segues into Feels Like I'm Falling in Love, I think is a real highlight on the album, and those pitch-shifted vocals remind me a lot of the band Portishead. Outside of the singles, I think that Good Feelings works as an upbeat synth-pop track, and one with a really cool bass line, and I think the track Eterna works for many of the same reasons. This really is an ambitious album, and even though albums like Viva La Vida tell me that Coldplay do make albums, as in cohesive pieces of works in and of themselves, and not just the 10 songs that they happen to write at the time stuck together, Moon Music was much more of an album experience than I was expecting. And I feel like it's a collection of songs that feel like they belong together. But do I think it's anything like Dark Side of the Moon? No. No, I don't. The experience of listening to Moon Music and allowing those songs to wash over you is a good one. But I have to say that even after multiple listens of the album, not a ton of it has really stuck around in my mind. The band have been criticised for writing very safe and very generic songs. And while I wouldn't say that the album is generic stylistically, I feel like it might be harmonically and melodically. Also, when it comes to the production, this of course is produced by Max Martin, who is, let's face it, one of the most important producers of this century, and someone who has produced a lot of massive hits. Not to mention that he has produced amazing sounding records. This is a good sounding record, absolutely. But at one moment over the weekend, I decided to listen to both Music of the Spheres and Moon Music together, because they are kind of sibling records. One thing I think that works really well with Moon Music is it has this kind of science fiction feel to it, and clearly that's something that the album's going for. But although Music of the Spheres has been criticised for being very clinical and overproduced, listening to them back to back, I found Music of the Spheres to be so much more vibrant. I dare say the songs in general felt a little bit more alive. And although this might be a misreading because I'm not an expert on production, I felt like the songs on Music of the Spheres in general made a better use of the whole frequency spectrum. The only way I can kind of contextualise this for any non-musicians watching this is when listening to Feels Like I'm Falling in Love, the song does sound good, but there are moments where it also feels a little bit sparse. And what really brought that into perspective for me was when that soaring lead guitar comes in at the end of the track. The song certainly sounds euphoric, and that's something that the production does very, very well. But the presence of that guitar made me realise how much space I couldn't help but feel was surrounding the track. And that goes back to what I'm saying about the frequency spectrum. A song like Higher Power sounds massive and it sounds really, really full. Feels Like I'm Falling in Love sounds big, but I don't feel like it's full. And I think that criticism goes for quite a lot of the album. Coldplay have mentioned that they're going to make 12 albums and then that's it. Now you could be cynical and say, well, there's a loophole there. They could still release singles, they could still do smaller projects, whatever. The thing I actually want to talk about was this notion of quality control. And I have to admit that I, and I'm sure many other people too, couldn't help but chortle when he raised this point. I can't say I associate Coldplay as a band that have the highest standards when it comes to quality control. But after giving it some thought, I think I understand where he's coming from. Because I don't think Moon Music is one of those albums where there's 2 good songs and then the rest of it's filler. Regardless on how I may feel about individual tracks within the listing, I do feel like that there is an overall concept to the album, that the album has an overall theme, and that all 10 of the tracks are just one piece of that puzzle that creates a greater picture, all of which pointing towards what Moon Music is trying to communicate to us. And so we circle back to, are Coldplay misunderstood? No, I don't think they are. I think the critics have a point, especially on the notion of their songs feeling somewhat generic, or of the band's output feeling more commercially driven rather than artistically. Whether that be the intention or not, I do feel like this does come across. But, as I said, I do think there is a vision to what they're doing. I do think that they take the album as a format seriously, and they clearly do take their career seriously. And I have no doubt that the band stand behind much of what they have done in their career. If you liked the singles of Moon Music, then I think you will enjoy the broader album. Although I will also accept that by this point in time, many of us have made up their minds on Coldplay. However, if you're like me and perhaps didn't have the most informed knowledge of who Coldplay are, I'm going to say to you maybe dive a little bit deeper, as coming back not just to the newer records, but to the older records as well, and giving them a proper listen has given me a few surprises and taught me things about the band that I didn't necessarily expect. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this, you might like to check out some of my other video essays, or perhaps some of my original music. My most recent is a song named Those Simple Moments, a slow burn indie rock tune very much centred around the electric guitar. I think that this is the best sounding song that I've put out. The experience recording it was a really good one, and I think this song in particular sets up a really good foundation for what could be to come in the future. In the meantime, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and I very much hope to see you in another video.